James Carver sat behind the wheel of his patrol car, the engine's low hum mixing with his own heavy breathing. Night had fallen over the West End, and streetlights cast pools of yellow light on the wet pavement. He had been on duty for 10 hours straight, responding to radio calls, checking on sounds in dark alleys, and writing reports at the station. Now he was on his last loop before heading home. He felt the weight of his tired eyes, the ache in his shoulders, and the dull throb. In his head, every mile he drove felt slower than the one before, and every shadow seemed more suspicious. The West End was an older part of the city, the narrow streets lined by small shops and worn brick buildings. Some of the stores had metal shutters. Pulled down after closing time, their graffiti-scrawled fronts glowing faintly in the night. A pizza parlor 2 blocks away still had lights on, sign flickering as though unsure whether to stay lit. Carver passed it and thought about stopping, in for one final slice, before going home. But he shook his head, remembering the early morning alarm he knew would jolt him awake in just a few hours. He needed rest more than he needed pizza. Carver's radio crackled to life, the dispatcher's calm voice interrupting his thoughts. There had been a report of a robbery at a convenience store on Maple Street earlier that evening. A report had come in around 9:30 saying that 2 young men had burst in, yelled threats, and grabbed cash. Carver had raced over with 2 other units. They found the store clerk shaken but unharmed. The robbers had fled before backup arrived. No one had been caught. The memory of the clerk's trembling hands and wide eyes made Carver's jaw tighten. He wondered whether those robbers had escaped into the maze of streets behind him. He flipped. The sirens switched off and on again, though there was no one else in sight to warn. A few blocks away, Marcus Thompson walked under the soft glow of a lone street lamp. His jacket kept out the night chill, and his polished shoes clicked against the sidewalk. Marcus had spent the evening at the local university where his daughter, Emily, was finishing her 2nd year of teaching English. He wore a dark blue suit that fit him well, the kind of suit a man might wear when he knew he would meet people who studied him carefully. Marcus was the state governor, but tonight he wanted nothing more than to listen to Emily talk about her students and her plans, which had been full of hope, eager to share stories of shy freshmen finding their voices, of poetry readings in small classrooms, of late-night cups of coffee and long conversations with classmates. Marcus listened with pride in his heart. After dinner in the campus cafe, Marcus had hugged Emily goodbye and told her he would give her privacy to grade papers. She had protested, saying he must go home and rest. He smiled and reminded her that a man in public service must sometimes work late. She had rolled her eyes but gave him the hug anyway. Now he walked home thinking of her bright face and the sound of her voice. In his breast pocket was his governor's ID card, a small plastic rectangle with his photo and seal. It was tucked beneath his shirt, pressed close to his chest. Waiting for a moment when he might need it, Carver's headlight swept over Marcus without him noticing. The officer saw what he believed to be a lone man, dressed neatly, but also walking on a quiet street known for robberies earlier in the week. Carver felt a knot in his stomach. His training told him to be alert, to treat every call with seriousness. He flicked on his cruiser's spotlight, a harsh white beam cutting through the darkness and landing on Marcus's dark suit. Marcus stopped in his tracks and looked toward the source of light. He raised a hand and tilted his head in greeting, not fully understanding why a police car's bright lights pointed at him. Carver watched Marcus for a moment, his finger twitching near the door lock. He judged the man by the way he stood, by the color of his skin, and by the way he held himself in a quiet neighborhood at night. Fear and suspicion rose in Carver's chest. He knew it was wrong to judge a person by appearance alone, but his own tired mind played tricks on him. The robbery call, the late hour, the empty street all pressed on him like a weight. He opened his car door and stepped onto the wet road, boots tapping on the asphalt. The rain had stopped, but the ground still glistened. Carver called out, his voice steady but firm. "Sir, hold on right there." His hand went to his belt, not yet on his weapon, but close enough to draw it if needed. He kept a safe distance, the beam of the spotlight making Marcus's shadow stretch behind him. "Marcus," heard the command and froze. He looked down at the officer's uniform, reading the badges and the patch on the shoulder. He realized this was an ordinary patrol officer, but he felt a sudden tension as bright lights focused on him. In one slow motion, he reached inside his jacket pocket to pull out his ID card, meant only to show Carver who he was, a man with right to walk any street at any time. But in the dark and under the stark light, that gesture looked like reaching for something dangerous. Carver's heart pounded. The air between them felt thick and heavy. Neither man spoke for a moment. Carver waited for Marcus to comply, expecting him to drop whatever he held. Marcus waited for Carver to lower the light to listen. The only sound was a distant car passing on another road and the soft hum of the patrol vehicle's idling engine. Carver's finger itched on the grip of his holstered revolver. Training told him to be ready for anything. He had seen videos in the academy of sudden attacks, of suspects pulling out hidden weapons. He had faced his own fear again and again during the robbery call earlier. Now, with the governor standing before him, all that fear pressed on his chest like a stone. Marcus lifted the ID slowly so Carver could see the seal and the photo. He said in a calm voice, "Officer, I'm Marcus Thompson, governor of this state. I'm on my way home." He held the badge at arm's length, careful not to move too fast. Carver blinked. The word governor echoed in his mind. He squinted at the card as though the beam of light would magically transform it into something else. He could feel the tension drained a little as he recognized the title, but his hands still trembled and his muscles stayed tight. For a moment, everything slowed. He had to decide whether to trust what he saw or react to every shadow. In that moment, neither man knew how long they stood there. Outside, the city carried on late-night buses rolled down main streets. A radio from a nearby window faded into the night, and a stray cat darted across an alleyway. The world seemed both enormous and strangely small, contained within the circle of police light and the silent figure holding a badge. James Carver took a slow breath and reached down to lower his weapon. The cold metal felt heavy in his hand as he unclasped it and let it hang by his side. He looked at Marcus's eyes, searching. For the man behind the title, saw no threat there. Only a man tired and wishing to go home too. Carver straightened up, the light in his hand now steady. Marcus let his breath out in a small sigh. His heart had raced, but he kept his voice calm as he said, "Thank you, officer." He slipped the card back into his pocket and drew his coat. Around him, took a step forward, intending to continue his walk home. Carver raised a hand as though to stop him, then lowered it again. The street returned to its quiet pace. Carver closed the passenger door without slamming it, sat back in his seat and switched off the spotlight. Marcus paused, glanced once more at the car, and then continued down the sidewalk, each footstep echoing on the wet stones. Carver watched until the man turned the corner and disappeared from view. He closed his eyes, thinking of the badge he had seen and the man he had almost treated as a threat. He thought of his own fear and how quickly it had almost caused harm. He thought of the long hours, the stress, and the shadows in his mind. And he thought of duty not only to protect the law, but also to protect every person's right to walk safely under the streetlights. When Marcus rounded the block and headed into the warmly lit porch of his home, he carried with him a weight pride in his work and a sorrow that he had been made to feel less safe by someone sworn to protect him. Behind him in the quiet street, James Carver sat for a moment longer before starting his car again. He turned the key, backed out slowly, and drove on, carrying that night's lesson with him into the rest of his life. ChatGPT said. James Carver eased the patrol car forward and glanced again at the dark street where Marcus Thompson had stood moments before. A knot of unease tightened in his chest. He told himself that he had been cautious, that he had acted out of concern for public safety. Yet as he drove on, each passing shadow seemed to ask whether he had gone too far. The night air felt colder now, as if the street itself disapproved of his shaken hand and racing heart. A few blocks ahead, Carver spotted a flicker of movement. Beneath another street lamp, flicked on the overhead lights and pulled to one side. The man beneath the lamp held a skateboard and wore a backpack. Carver rolled down his window and called out a greeting, his voice firmer than before. The young man jumped, startled, and raised his hands. Carver recognized himself in that youth's wide eyes, the same fear he had felt. He took a breath and introduced himself as an officer, making sure to stay calm. He asked the skater where he was headed at this hour. The youth stammered about going home from a friend's house. Carver let out a small sigh of relief and reminded him to keep two well-lit paths. As the skater thanked him and sped off, Carver realized his palms still gripped the pistol he had barely touched since the academy. He unclenched his fist and dropped his hand to the steering wheel. The realization that he had aimed his gun at a man simply walking home weighed heavily on him. Back at the station the next morning, Carver sat at his desk, trying to concentrate on paperwork but unable to shake the incident. Morning sunlight slanted through the blinds, illuminating stacks of reports and memos. He forced himself to review yesterday's shift log, hoping routine tasks might calm him. But each line, each call, each address, each suspect description felt like a reminder of how on edge he had been. His mind kept returning to the glint of the badge and the governor's calm expression, as Marcus had revealed his identity. Meanwhile, Thompson awoke in his home above the city's east end. Sunlight filtered through curtains in his study, where he often read reports and prepared for meetings. Today, though, his thoughts drifted back to the night before. Dressed carefully, as he always did, choosing a crisp shirt and matching tie. But the memory of car headlights glaring, of rigid authority pointed at him, made his fingers hesitate at each button. He wondered how many people he passed each day felt the same tension. He thought of the gardener who waited outside, the mail carrier who approached the door. Did they worry he might judge them as a threat? At breakfast, Emily poured coffee and looked at her father with concern. "You seem distant today," she said gently. Marcus forced a smile and sipped the bitter brew. He recounted the encounter, though sparing some details. He spoke of the late-night walk, of the police light, of the moment he showed his badge. Emily's eyes grew wide. "They pointed a gun at you," she whispered, not at his expression. Sober, she reached across the table and placed her hand on his. That couldn't have been easy. Kasha shook his head and admitted how shaken he remained. In the governor's office, a meeting with his chief of staff filled the morning calendar. Secret Service protocols required he file a formal report of any threatening incident. Yet Marcus hesitated to call it threatening. He had not felt violence. Intended, only suspicion. Still, he knew how important it was to document every detail. He described the time, the location, the officer's badge number if he had caught it. His chief of staff listened, taking notes with furrowed brows. "We'll follow up," she promised. "I'll have legal draft a statement, and we'll decide what to share publicly." By midday, word of the encounter had reached local newsrooms. A brief alert ran on a regional news site. Governor reportedly stopped by police under suspicion. Social media buzzed with comments. Some praised the officer for vigilance. Others expressed outrage that a high-ranking official had been treated like a suspect. Carver's name was not mentioned, but his voice echoed in the public imagination.
Oh.
Marcus watched the swirling reactions and felt a pang of frustration. He cared deeply about law and order, but he also believed in fairness and respect. He worried that this one incident might overshadow larger goals. Late that afternoon, Carver received a call on his squad radio. He was to report to Internal Affairs for a routine debrief. His stomach twisted as he parked in the station lot. He entered the building under the harsh fluorescent lights and found a small conference room. Two investigators sat waiting, their expression neutral and professional. Carver sat across from them, hands clasped on the table. They asked him to recount his actions step by step. He spoke slowly, aware of every word, determined to be honest. He described the robbery call earlier, his fatigue, his fear in the street. The questions continued. Why he did not verify identity sooner, whether he had received any bias training. Carver answered as clearly as he could. He admitted his mistake in assuming guilt based on appearance and said he regretted drawing his weapon. The investigators nodded and took notes. They reminded him that officers carry tremendous responsibility, that the power they wield must be balanced with care. Carver felt heavy with remorse. He recognized the truth in their words and vowed to learn from this. Elsewhere, Governor Thompson decided to meet with the city's police chief. He believed in partnership between the state government and local law enforcement. He valued the chief's leadership and hoped together they could address bias in policing. In the chief's office, decorated with plaques and framed photos of community events, the two men shook hands. The chief expressed regret over the incident and thanked the governor for his willingness to dialogue. They discussed new training programs, community forums, and ways to build trust. Marcus spoke of listening tours and civilian oversight boards. The chief agreed to schedule meetings and pilot bias awareness workshops. That evening, Carver watched the sun set from his small apartment. He held his service revolver in his hands, examining it as one might inspect an old tool. He thought of the sweat in his palm, the moment his judgment had faltered. He reminded himself why he had joined the force, to protect people. He reholstered the weapon and placed it on his dresser. Then he sat at his kitchen table and wrote a letter to his supervisor, acknowledging his error and requesting further training. He ended by saying he would do everything in his power to serve without fear or prejudice. During the same hour, Governor Thompson sat in his living room and reviewed proposals for the training programs he had discussed earlier, scribbled notes on bias awareness curriculum, community policing initiatives, and support for officers under stress. He felt a cautious hope that this moment of tension, to men, fear on both sides, could become a catalyst for lasting change. He picked up his phone and left a message for Officer Carver, inviting him to meet and share his perspective. Closed his eyes and leaned back, imagining a path forward where police and community walked side by side under the same streetlights. Free from fear, each recognizing the humanity in the other. Carver woke early the next morning to a ring of his phone. He rubbed sleep from his eyes and answered, recognizing the number from Internal Affairs. He was asked to come in for another meeting, this one with the police chief himself. His stomach twisted, but he dressed quickly, putting on his uniform with care, straightened his badge, ran a comb through his hair, and left his apartment under the pale light of dawn. In the cool air, he thought about the weight of the previous night. He remembered the fear that had flared in his chest when he saw the governor's badge, and how shame had followed once he realized his mistake. At the station, Carver followed a senior sergeant down a corridor lined with bulletin boards and wanted posters. The walls felt narrower than usual, as though they were closing in on him. He was led into a private office where the chief of police stood beside a conference table. The chief was a tall man with salt and pepper hair, known for fairness, but also for holding his officers to high standards. Carver saluted, then stood at ease, as the chief motioned him to sit. Sunlight filtered through a small window, dust motes drifting in the beam. Carver's hands were clammy as he settled into the chair. The chief spoke first in a calm voice. He thanked Carver for his years of service and acknowledged the stress inherent in police work. He went on to say that the incident with Governor Thompson had brought unwelcome attention to the department and that it was crucial to learn from it. Carver listened, his heart pounding. He admitted again that he had acted on bias and fear, not on solid evidence. He told the chief how he had regretted drawing his weapon and how eager he was to make amends. The chief nodded and said he would recommend Carver for special training in community relations and bias awareness. Later that day, Carver met with a group of trainers in a bland conference room. The walls were painted a dull beige, and a circle of chairs faced a whiteboard. A trainer introduced herself as Officer Maria Lopez, someone respected for her calm approach and clear thinking. She had led workshops on bias and communication across the state. She asked Carver to speak about the incident, to describe his thoughts and feelings as he confronted Governor Thompson. Carver spoke honestly, tears gathering unbidden as he recalled the moment he saw the governor's face and how guilty he felt. The other officers in the room listened without judgment. After Carver's turn, Officer Lopez guided a discussion about how split-second decisions could have lasting consequences. She presented scenarios in which officers might misread a situation and how to slow down mentally to avoid rash actions. Carver learned breathing techniques to manage adrenaline, practiced clear verbal commands to suspects, and rehearsed steps for verifying identity calmly. He found the exercises difficult but valuable. Each time he faltered, classmates shared small corrections, warm encouragement filling the room. Carver felt a spark of hope that he might become a better officer, one who balanced vigilance with respect. Meanwhile, Governor Thompson's team prepared a public statement. They wanted to address the incident thoughtfully, without inflaming tensions further. Marcus and his chief of staff met with a communications advisor in a corner office. With a view of the state capitol building, they drafted words that acknowledged the officer's duty to protect, but also emphasized the importance of fair treatment for everyone, regardless of rank or color. The statement spoke of the power of dialogue and the need to strengthen trust between law enforcement and the people they served. Marcus reviewed the draft, ensuring it carried both firmness and compassion. That afternoon, the statement went live on the governor's official website and social media channels. Reporters seized on the story, some praising Marcus's calm response, others questioning why bias still existed among officers. Commenters on news articles shared personal stories, some of being stopped by police for no reason, others of family members who suffered worse. A few wrote messages of support for Officer Carver, hopeful that training would help him grow. Marcus read through many of the messages late at night, feeling the weight of collective hope and pain. He realized that his one experience was a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Back at the training workshop, Carver spent long hours reflecting on his own biases. He spoke with fellow officers who confessed their own fears, some worried about high-crime neighborhoods they patrolled, about making mistakes that could cost lives. They spoke of how stress from home, sports games, or even lack of sleep could cloud judgment. Carver realized that training alone might not be enough. Officers also needed support for mental health and clear guidance on community engagement. He drafted a list of ideas for the chief peer support groups, regular check-ins with supervisors, and ride-alongs with community leaders. A few days later, Carver received an invitation from Governor Thompson to attend a community forum. He stared at the envelope on his kitchen table, unopened. The letter invited him to speak about his experience and to listen to residents who had faced unfair treatment. The idea of standing before an audience still made him nervous. He worried about being judged or that he might say the wrong thing. Yet he also felt it was a chance to show sincerity and to bridge a gap between police and citizens. He took a deep breath, accepted the invitation, and wrote back a brief note of thanks. On the evening of the forum, Carver arrived at a small community center filled with folding chairs and a simple wooden podium. Residents filled the seats, students, elders, shopkeepers, and families. At the front sat Governor Thompson and the police chief. A projector slid in images, photos of community policing events, smiling children in safety vests, officers playing basketball with teens. The mood felt hopeful yet serious. When it was Carver's turn, he stood at the podium, voice slightly unsteady, and told his story. He admitted his mistake, spoke of fear and regret, and explained what he had learned in training. Silence followed his words. Then a woman from the back stood and asked how he would treat others differently. Carver answered in simple terms. He would slow down before reacting, look for facts rather than relying on assumptions, and always remember that every person deserved respect. Another man asked what support officers needed. Carver spoke of counseling, bias workshops, and positive interactions with community members. After the questions ended, people approached him. Some shook his hand. Others offered understanding, smiles. Marcus joined Carver and said quietly, "Thank you for your honesty." Carver nodded, relief and pride mingling in his chest. In the weeks that followed, the department rolled out new programs. Monthly community walks, where officers and residents talked informally. Regular bias awareness sessions, and a mentorship program linking new officers with seasoned ones who valued fairness. Carver volunteered to lead the walks in his district. He found joy in simple conversations, talking with an elderly man about gardening, teaching a teen about traffic signals, or helping a shopkeeper install a new mailbox. Each exchange built trust, reminding Carver why he became an officer. Governor Thompson often attended these walks, shaking hands and listening to stories. He made a point to greet Carver in front of the crowd, praising his efforts to change. Local news cameras captured images of the governor and the officer walking side by side, pointing out landmarks and sharing light laughter. The sight gave many people hope that change was possible when leaders and frontline workers cooperated. One evening, after a walk ended at a small park, Carver and Marcus sat on a bench under a lantern's soft glow. They spoke quietly of how far they had come from a moment of tension to a partnership of purpose. Marcus thanked Carver for his courage in facing mistakes and for working to build a better future. Carver thanked the governor for giving him a chance to learn instead of punish. They both looked around at families playing nearby and felt a shared hope. Carver walked home that night feeling lighter than he had in months. He knew the work was not overbiased, could creep back if not watched. But he also felt stronger, guided by empathy and clear purpose. Governor Thompson, too, felt renewed as he returned to the capital, confident that real progress came from honest conversations. In a city where fear once drew a gun and nearly ended in tragedy, two men had chosen understanding instead. And in that choice, they had sparked a movement that might one day light every dark corner with respect and trust. James Carver woke to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. The digital display glowed with the words administrative leave, confirming what he already knew. He would not return to patrol for some time. He swung his legs out of bed and sat on the edge, looking around his small apartment. The morning light filtered through the curtains. Everything felt quiet, too quiet. The walls seemed to press in on him, reminding him that the life he had known was on pause. He dressed in plain clothes instead of his uniform, choosing a simple shirt and jeans. He felt the weight of the officer's badge in his pocket. Even though he was not wearing it, the badge had felt like a symbol of pride before. Now it felt like a burden, a reminder of his mistake. Left his apartment and walked to the station, each step echoing on the sidewalk. At the station, he reported, "To internal affairs again." The hallway smelled of coffee and cleaning products. He passed rows of officers in uniform, some offering quiet nods of support, others avoiding his gaze. He made his way to a small conference room, where two investigators sat behind a long table. They greeted him politely and motioned for him to sit. One investigator slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were reports, statements, and photographs of the street lamp where he had stopped Governor Thompson. Carver looked at the pages, recognizing the sequence of events all over again. The investigators asked him to explain his mindset and to comment on the department's policies. He spoke carefully, admitting how his fear had clouded his judgment, and acknowledging that he should have asked questions before aiming his weapon. After he finished, the investigators closed the folder and thanked him. Carver stood, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. He left the room quietly, a heavy sense of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Word of the incident had spread. Across the city, local news anchors replayed the dashcam footage showing Carver's cruiser pulling up and bright lights shining on Marcus Thompson. Journalists debated whether Carver had acted too quickly or if police faced unreasonable risks. On late-night calls, opinion columns filled the pages of newspapers. Some writers called for harsher penalties for officers who showed bias. Others warned that policing was difficult work and that split-second decisions could save lives. Community leaders held meetings. In small halls and church basements, they invited citizens to share their stories of unfair treatment by police. A middle-aged man spoke of being stopped repeatedly for minor traffic violations. A young woman described feeling unsafe when an officer questioned her at a bus stop. The stories wove together into a tapestry of frustration and fear, each one giving weight to the incident with Governor Thompson. Governor Thompson stood at the center of this storm. He had promised to handle the matter thoughtfully without turning every conversation into a political battle, yet he heard from both sides. Police officers asking for understanding, community members demanding justice. He held a press conference in front of the state capitol's grand steps. He spoke of his respect for law enforcement, of his gratitude for officers who put their lives on the line. Then he spoke of the right of every citizen to be treated with dignity and fairness, no matter the hour or the neighborhood. He announced a commission to study bias in policing across the state. The commission would include experts in law enforcement, civil rights advocates, mental health professionals, and community representatives. Would gather data, hold hearings, and recommend changes. Carver, still on leave, wondered if his name would appear in the commission's discussions. He hoped that the work would bring real results, not just words on paper. Meanwhile, Carver spent his days attending counseling sessions and bias awareness workshops. He learned about the history of policing and how stereotypes formed over time. He practiced mindfulness exercises to notice his own thoughts and emotions before acting on them. He wrote essays about his experiences, reflecting on how fear and prejudice could harm others. Each session felt like a small step toward healing, but he also felt raw and exposed. At home, he read articles about community policing successes in other cities. Some places had officers ride bicycles through neighborhoods, stopping to talk with residents. Others held monthly coffee with a cop events in local cafes. Carver took notes, imagining how those ideas might work in his own district. Sketched plans for community events, for workshops where officers and residents could learn side by side. After 2 weeks, Carver received a letter from the police chief. It invited him to join the commission as a representative of patrol officers. The letter said his experience could offer valuable insight into the challenges officers face and the changes needed to reduce bias. Carver felt both honored and nervous. He worried that his presence might cause more anger, but he also saw a chance to help shape real reform. At the first meeting of the commission, Carver sat at a long table with 11 other members. A lawyer, a professor, a former judge, 2 pastors, a young activist, a police trainer, a mental health counselor, and the governor himself filled the seats. The room smelled of coffee and fresh paper. Governor Thompson opened the meeting, thanking everyone for their service and asking them to speak openly. Carver listened as people shared stories and studies. He heard statistics about racial disparities in traffic stops and use of force. He saw charts showing how officers' decisions were influenced by stress and exhaustion. He watched community advocates describe the pain of being stopped without cause. When it was his turn, he spoke in a quiet voice. He explained his own mistake, his regret, and what he had learned in training. He described the moment he saw the governor's badge and how it broke through his fear. He said he believed officers must see each person as human first, not as a potential threat. The commission worked for weeks, holding hearings in different cities. They invited officers to testify, residents to share experiences, and experts to offer solutions. Carver attended each session, taking notes and asking questions. He learned that change required more than new policies. It needed culture shifts, support systems, and ongoing evaluation. One evening, the commission held a town hall in the West End, the very neighborhood where the incident happened. 100 people filled the community center. Carver watched as nervous residents approached, a microphone to speak. A teenager asked how police would treat young people differently. An older woman asked for accountability when officers overstepped. Carver spoke after them, listening first and then answering their questions honestly. He promised that officers would slow down, verify identities respectfully, and engage in open communication. When the town hall ended, many people stayed behind to speak with him privately. A man shook his hand and said he believed Carver wanted to help. A young woman smiled and thanked him for admitting his mistake. Carver felt a warmth in his chest, a sense that his actions could help bridge the gap between police and community. Back at home, Carver wrote a summary of the town hall for his police chief. He described the concerns raised, the ideas shared, and the hope he saw on people's faces. He recommended that the department adopt community walk programs, bias check-ins, and mental health support for officers. He closed his letter by saying he looked forward to returning to duty with a new sense of purpose. The governor's commission released its final report a month later. It contained dozens of recommendations: expanded bias training, community police liaison roles, mental health services for officers, transparent data collection, and civilian oversight committees. The governor held a press conference to unveil the report. He spoke about the power of listening and collaboration. He thanked every member of the commission and called on lawmakers to fund the changes. The legislature approved funding for pilot programs in several cities. Officers began riding bikes in neighborhoods, attending workshops, and participating in community events. Carver returned to patrol with new tools and support. He found himself greeting familiar faces on the street with genuine warmth. He felt more confident in asking questions and less reactive in tense moments. He noticed that, when he slowed down and spoke calmly, most interactions ended with a handshake or a smile. One night, Carver walked his beat in the West End. He met a young man he had stopped for a broken taillight months ago. Now they talked like neighbors. The young man mentioned his new job, and Carver asked about his family. They laughed over a shared joke about the old pizza parlor sign that still flickered. Carver walked on, thinking about how far he had come. From the night he pointed his gun at Governor Thompson, his pocket, he carried a coffee voucher from the Coffee with a Cop event he had hosted that afternoon. He planned to meet a small group of residents in the morning to discuss neighborhood safety. As he stepped under the street lamp where it all began, he looked up at the light and nodded. The shadows of fear that once haunted him were gone. Their place was a sense of trust built slowly, one conversation at a time. The sun rose on a crisp morning as James Carver stood at the edge of the community garden he had helped plant just weeks before. The rows of bright marigolds and tomatoes glowed in the early light, and the scent of fresh soil filled the air. He watched a few neighbors arrive, Mrs. Delgado with her woven basket of seeds, a group of children chasing each other between the raised beds, and a young man wearing a delivery uniform who paused to greet an elderly couple tending lettuce. Carver felt a quiet pride knowing he played a part in creating this space where people came together, not as stranger and officer, but as friends, nurturing life side by side. Across town, Governor Marcus Thompson prepared for his weekly radio address. He adjusted his tie in the studio mirror before stepping before the microphone. This morning, he planned to speak about the commission's progress and share a story that everyone in the community already knew: how a single encounter won. Officers' fear in one governor's badge had sparked a conversation that grew into something far beyond that street lamp. He spoke into the mic with warmth, recounting how Officer Carver had faced his mistake, attended training, and chosen to listen to those he once viewed with suspicion. He described the garden project, the community walks, and the small victories. A child smiling at an officer, a resident offering water to a patrol bike rider, a shared joke over a flickering pizza parlor sign. Marcus closed by thanking every person working toward a future where respect lit every corner of the city. The West End Carver welcomed his first visitor of the day. The young deliverman was back with his elderly neighbors, bringing them lemonade. He told Carver they were grateful for the garden and for the new sense of safety they felt seeing officers among them. Carver smiled and handed each of them a small packet of sunflower seeds. "Plant these by your windows," he said. "He'll remind you how we all help each other grow." The deliverman nodded, and before leaving, he said quietly, "Thank you for being here." Carver watched him go, thinking how different this was from the night when he had pointed his gun at a man simply walking home. Meanwhile, Marcus visited a suburban school to announce a new grant for youth programs. He walked down a hallway decorated with children's artwork about community heroes. One drawing showed a police officer and a child reading side by side. Another showed families planting trees. Marcus paused before each colorful image, and the students beamed when they saw him stop. He spoke about partnership, how government, police, and citizens could work together to build safe, friendly neighborhoods. He even invited one class to help design next summer's community event. As he left, he heard small voices calling Governor Thompson and thank you. He waved back, feeling hopeful that these young minds would carry the lessons forward. Back in the city center, Carver and a few officers unloaded tables and chairs outside a corner cafe. Today was Coffee with a Cop morning, and after the garden breakfast, Carver had agreed to stay for a casual chat. The cafe's owner set out steaming pots of coffee and trays of pastries. Neighbors arrived, drawn by the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls and by the chance to speak face-to-face with officers. Carver noticed familiar faces: children from the skate park, shopkeepers who once feared being stopped, and even some of the very residents who attended the town hall months ago. They greeted Carver with handshakes and hugs, and he felt a warm rush as stories were shared. A mother asked his advice on street safety for her children. A teenager asked how to join the police department's cadet program, and an older man recounted how he no longer feared police visits when delivering mail. That afternoon, Marcus joined Carver at the cafe. He arrived unannounced, wearing a simple shirt and no tie. Carver stood to greet him, and the neighbors clapped when they saw the governor and officer chatting together over mugs of coffee. Marcus thanked Carver for organizing the event and praised the genuine conversations that had unfolded. Child tugged at Marcus's sleeve, wanting to show him a drawing of the garden. Carver helped Marcus lean down so the little artist could explain each flower. Marcus listened closely, asking questions and smiling, and the child glowed with pride.
Yes.
The sun dipped low. Carver walked through the neighborhood on his final patrol before the weekend. He passed the garden beds now bathed in golden light, the cafe with its last customers waving goodbye, and the houses where porch lights glowed softly. He thought about how far they all had come. He remembered his own fear that night when he had mistaken the governor for a suspect. He remembered the shame and regret, the training workshops, the town hall, the commission, and the small acts that followed. He realized that those moments of humility and listening mattered as much as any new policy. He reached the corner where that fearful night had begun. The street lamp still stood, its bulb gentle and unthreatening. Carver paused, one hand resting on the lamp's cool metal. He felt a wave of gratitude to Marcus Thompson for responding, with dialogue instead of anger, to the community for giving him a chance, and to his fellow officers who walked this path alongside him. He looked up at the light and silently promised to keep that ember of trust glowing. A few blocks away, Marcus watched the evening news at home. The anchor spoke of the new youth grant, the commission's continued work, and the smiles on residents' faces during community events. A short clip showed Carver laughing with neighbors at the cafe. Marcus felt a swell of pride. He turned off the TV and looked at his family photos on the mantle, the picture of him and Emily at the university campus, the image of the governor and officer walking side by side under a street lamp, and a candid shot of Carver handing sunflower seeds to neighbors. Each photo captured a story of transformation, of two men who chose understanding over fear. Before bed, Marcus opened his desk drawer and found a small notebook he kept for moments of hope. He flipped through pages filled with ideas: park beautification, projects, literacy programs, joint sports leagues, mental health resources for officers, and more. He added a new entry that night: celebrate the day James Carver returns to full duty. Plan a citywide community picnic. He closed the notebook, satisfied. When Carver returned to full duty the following Monday, he put on his uniform with calm confidence. His badge gleamed at his chest, no longer a burden, but a symbol of renewed purpose. He stepped into his cruiser and drove through the West End, greeting neighbors and offering waves. He noticed how people no longer hurried past, but paused to say hello. He felt a deep sense of belonging to the force he served, to the city he protected, and to the people who had welcomed him back. In the months that followed, the reforms took root. The Commission's recommendations guided new policies. The community forums became regular fixtures, and the bonds between officers and residents strengthened. Carver led new recruits on ride-alongs, teaching them the lessons he learned about kindness and patience. Marcus continued his listening tours, forging connections that spanned neighborhoods. The city grew brighter under streetlights, fueled by trust and respect. And every time Carver passed that corner lamp, he remembered the night when fear almost broke the bond between law and community. He remembered the man he had pointed a gun at, the governor who chose dialogue in the long journey toward understanding. He raised his head with gratitude, knowing that such a moment could have ended badly, but instead became the seed from which new hope grew. In that simple garden, that busy cafe, and that small commission room, two men had changed not only their own lives but the heart of a city. And from those changes, everyone thrived together.